Hey there guys, DCSU here, and today I'll be doing a somewhat of a tier list discussion, or in this case, what you might verse on the ranked ladder if you're playing on King of Games, or in this case, you're starting to get from Platinum rank, and starting to climb from Platinum to Legend, and all the way to King of Games. Now, Gold is a bit of a mishap, or in this case, a strange rank in general, because you're not going to find some interesting... Well, you're going to find some interesting decks, definitely, on the Gold ladder, but Gold is, like, very, very random. You might find meta decks, you might not find meta decks. You can find some really weird decks on the ladder, so I don't treat Gold as more of a competitive ladder. I think it's more of a... like a jungle, I should say, more of a safari. So Gold is like one of those weird ranks. It's like if you're trying to like climb the ladder, Gold is where you're gonna have probably the most, well, I guess you could say not difficulties, but since Legend is more predictable, Platinum's somewhat predictable, but when it comes to Gold is where things get a bit weirder. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about Gold, I'm here to talk about Platinum onwards. So these are the lists. These are the decks I have listed below. So as you can see here by the icons, we've got Amazonas, Ancient Gear, all the way to Weather Painters. So what are you going to find on the ladder depends on what you can see from these. I believe they're 31. Yeah, these 31 icons. Sorry, I meant 33, not 31. I had to recount for a moment. Alright, so yeah, Amazon's all the way to Weather Painters. Now, Amazonas, you might find on a ladder occasionally. You're gonna probably find it more in Odeon decks or balance-based decks rather than your typical, I don't know, stall-based deck. But it's mostly a stall-based deck for Amazons. So, what I would recommend, put Amazonas in, I'd probably rank it as Rogue because you're not gonna find too many Amazonas decks, and if you do, Amazonas has been out for a very long time. So basically, they heavily rely on the back row, and they basically run their queen to pretty much defend themselves, and you run the princess to literally summon out either the queen or the swordswoman, depending on what your field is. It's pretty simple. Now, Ancient Gears. Ancient Gears is another deck that you can find on the ladder. Is it King Games worthy? Potentially, yes. All of these decks are probably King Games worthy. Depends on how good your matchups is, and it all depends on how you build your deck in general. So yeah, Ancient Gears. What I think of this one, it's going to be interesting because this deck you mostly find. It's mostly a back row based, interruption in a way, because Ancient Gears you get around. It gets around monster effects when it comes to the Gowling, well, the big boss monster in general, but also it's another deck that's very anti-meta in a way because it's anti-Shiranui and it's also I guess you could say it's anti-invoked in general. Maybe Black Wings, depends, but also actually no, it is also an anti. Yeah, it's anti-meta. It works against all the other decks. Now that I think about it, yeah. What I think about Ancient Gears. It's also a rogue category, but in my opinion, you don't really verse enough Ancient Gears on the ladder to literally rank it. So, I'd say rogue because you're not going to find it that often on the ladder, but you're also not going to use it. You're not going to verse it that much. It all depends on the person's player's preference, also depending on when they can play the deck. Now. Aramage. Aramage is another it is a top tier free-to-play deck if you are playing this as a free-to-play version. So, versing this on the ladder is very, very common because it's very easy to get, or you can get like 95% of the cards from the card trader, and you can get the rest from the Fortress of Gears, I believe. It's basically the set that comes with the Ballista Squad. So yeah, it's very, very free to play for Aramage. It's definitely one of the most grindiest matchups in Duel Links, and it's also a very, very powerful deck if it gets going. But once it gets going, it's really hard to stop because all those life points is really hard to deal with. And if they get enough life points and they have enough control over you, you pretty much, it's like a landslide. It's a very good tempo deck. It has a slow start, but once it gets going, it's literally hard to stop. It's like I guess you could say it's like the Altergeist version of the Duel Links. So, in my opinion, on the ladder, it's very easy to come across. So in popularity, I think it's a choice between tier 2 and tier 3. In my personal opinion, it doesn't have. It's definitely not Rogue. It is definitely a top tier contender. I'd probably say tier 3, probably the first of its kind for tier 3. It just meets the criteria of tier 3. But then again, it can be tier 2, tier 3. It depends on how the deck is built, but it's mostly very standard. All Mermaid decks are pretty standard, so in my opinion, there's nothing really too differential about all of them, so tier 3 most likely. Black Wings, a very, very powerful deck, and it's mostly just ultra rare. It's a very powerful and yet very expensive deck to make. So, yeah, you're going to find this on the ladder 100% of the time, well, 90% of the time, 90% of the time, depending on how you match up. One time when I tried to get to King Games, I rarely came across a Blackwing deck, maybe once or twice, but it's definitely a very top tier contender of what you're gonna verse. So in my opinion, it's definitely in there of tier 1 to tier 2, in my opinion. It's against, if you're playing it like going first, it's got a pretty good lineup in terms of how it can set up its field. But when it goes second, that's when it goes off. And if it doesn't get interrupted, it goes off like crazy. So yeah, it's definitely worthy of a tier 1, tier 2 slot. It has gone up to the tier 1 slot before, but in my personal opinion, it's probably, I'd probably say a tier 1 slot, because you're definitely going to find it on the ladder. It's definitely very, very consistent, but it does have some bricks in terms of its playstyle, sorry, but it's definitely a top tier deck nonetheless. Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes, you are going to find it on the ladder consistently, but it's like, you mostly find Blue Eyes decks play a lot of back row discard-based cards, like your Karma cards, your Regeki Breaks, Ultimate Providences. It's a kind of a beatdown yet control? No, it's definitely a beatdown-ish deck. It's not tempo based, it's very aggro, but it's like, it has a similar control. It has a mini control based engine in the deck, but it's like, you're not going to find it too much on the ladder, but when it does come up, it does come up. If you know how to get around Blue Eyes, it's definitely something to play around against. What do I rank it in the tier? Probably, it's not Rogue, I can tell you that. I'd probably say, tier 3. Tier 3 is definitely a worthy contender for this deck, because it's not like, it's not valued as Rogue, but it's not valued as top tier as well. It's like in the middle, in a way. So that's where tier 3 comes up, where it's like, it's in the middle. But if we do go into a slower format, yeah, Blue Eyes is definitely going to be a deck that you will definitely not, you'll definitely struggle in a way. Well, not struggle, but more like, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty when it comes to building the deck. But it's also known as a brick eyes deck, because you're definitely going to brick in the deck eventually. Crystron's definitely a top tier deck. You are going to find Crystrons to be well in the top range of having difficulties versing against. You're going to have difficulties against it going second, but if it does well going first, it just sets up like crazy. You have to bait out a lot of stuff in order to get around the Crystron synchro plays, but it's definitely a deck that is not easy to beat, but it's also not, it's not easy to beat, yet it's not difficult to beat in general, if you know how to play around it. It depends on how you tech your deck, but yeah, how you how you put your tech cards in the deck. It's definitely worthy of tier 1 contender, as it's a very, very powerful deck if you come across the ladder. But if you have some good tech cards, it's definitely probably be worthy of a tier 2 slot, but in terms of playability, and when it comes against rogue decks, it's definitely a top tier deck. Now, Cyber Dragons aren't what they used to be, but they are definitely a powerful deck if they go second, because they can literally wipe out back row, and they will literally OTK you if they go second, because once they go second and they have control over you for OTKing, there is no way of coming back. But if it goes first, if you have a really good, like if you run like Hatronades or Cosmic Cyclones or anything like back row removal, yeah, this deck is literally dead. It can't do anything against you, because once you get rid of the back row, it's literally a class cannon. But yeah, it's definitely worthy of top tier deck. Definitely not tier 3. It's definitely not worthy of tier 3 slot, but it's definitely in the middle of tier 1 to tier 3. So I think it's worthy of being the first of its kind for tier 2. Well, in this case, for my ladder. In this case, my rankings. So Dark Magician, that's another deck that is also on the ladder that you're going to come across against. Definitely one of the top decks that you will come across against. It's definitely a very powerful control deck, and it's definitely has some good beaters in general. It does struggle against anything that's 3k or higher, and anything that can't be targeted, but other than that, it's definitely a good control deck nonetheless. What is it worthy for the tier slot? In my opinion, it has a good matchup against Blackwings. It has a good matchup against Crystals. Maybe it depends. Depends on how you. Depends on who goes first. That's all. That's what matters when it comes to the matchup in when you're going first or second. So Dark Magician probably worthy of tier, in my opinion, it's worthy of being tier 1 to tier 2. So for now, I'll probably place it as a tier 2 slot, because it's not tier 1 worthy. It's not like that OP specific, but it's definitely not exactly. It has done some difficulties against tier 1, but it also has some difficulties against tier 2 in general. So yeah, tier 2 is, and also some rogue matchup as well. So definitely worthy of probably being. Yeah, I think I value it as more of a tier 2 deck rather than a tier 1 deck. DDDs. Now DDDs are very. It's a roguish deck, but it's also a tierish deck. It's very. Once it gets going, it's a combo deck. So if you're familiar with how to work with the combos and also play around the combos, it's very, very good in terms of its playability. But if you're playing it in general, like if you can not brick with the deck, it does well. But if you open up a lot of combos, it can do pretty well. But it does brick quite hard, so it's not exactly top tier in terms of tier 1. It definitely isn't worthy of being a tier 2 slot. It's not. It's probably not rogue material. I think it might fall under the tier 3 slot, depending on how you would view it. But yeah, it's definitely under the tier 3 slot, in my personal opinion. Now, here we go and talk about the Desperado deck. Now, Desperado, it's been around for a very, very long time with the Machina Structure deck. Is it Machina Structure deck? Desperado Structure deck came out. It was worthy of being a tier 1, tier 2 slot, but in my opinion, it's got its ups and downs. If you can play around it, if you can figure out the hourglass and figure out how you can play around it, it's not exactly tier 3 material. I think it's not even tier 1 or tier 2 worthy. I think it's like a rogue matchup. It does have its ups and downs, but if you don't draw into your Desperado, it's definitely a good control deck. But if you're versing Sartori's, you're gonna verse Desperado. So yeah, if they're playing master of whatever that skill is, master whatever with Sartori's, then you're gonna verse. It's very predictable. As you can see, a pattern of the Amazonas, Ancient Gears, and Desperado. It's a very niche deck. Now, Dragoonies. Now, Dragoonies are a very, very good, very powerful going second deck, but it's also a very good going. Actually, it has some recoverability going first, but it's not exactly the best deck. It's very powerful. Don't get me wrong, it's a very, very powerful deck if you're going second. But that's all it is. It's a going second OTK based deck. It does struggle against control. Let me start that. Yeah. Let me talk about it. It does struggle against control, but if it opens up Trunade, or opens up Forbidden Lance, or Cosmic Cyclone, depending on how many back row there are, Dragoonies can do quite a lot. So yeah, of playing around back row. It's definitely worthy of being tiered as a tier 3 deck. Tier 2, it depends. It can fall under tier 2, tier 3 category, but it's definitely has more win ratios than your typical tier 3 decks. So yeah, I think you will find it on the ladder quite commonly. To be fair, I've run into it a couple of times, and if they have the out to my back row, they have the out. So yeah, it's definitely a tier 2 deck. Now, Evil Eye it's a very graveyard control heavy deck. It's good. If you verse against a deck that plays Necro Valley, the deck literally suffers. But other than that, it's a very powerful deck. If you know you're versing against Mokuba or if you verse Yuma, actually now that I think about it, you either verse Yuma, you either verse Mokuba from Darkside Dimension, or you verse a Destiny Draw based deck for Yamayuki. You will know it's a Evil Eye deck. So yeah, definitely a very good graveyard control deck. How would I rank it? I'd probably put it under the tier 3 section. It does have its moments when it comes to tier 2, but if the tier 2 or tier 1 decks can get around the back row, in this case get around your Evil Eye Selene, it's pretty much dead. Evil Eye can't really do much. They can pretty much OTK you, because if they lose the equip spell, it's literally dead. It's like a sitting duck. Now, Gladiator Beast. The best skills run Gladiator Beast now is probably Balance. So, Rogue, that's all I'm going to say. It has its moments, but it has its flaws. It's not worthy of being classed as top tier, but it's Rogue. Gagaga or Gogogo or Dododo or however you want to call it. Ever since the new Shark Fang box came out, Dodos have been seen play a bit, but once they bring out the Golden Golem, if you can get around the Golden Golem it only has a one-time negate. So if you get around that one-time negate and you have some backup plays, the deck is literally dead. Because it's really easy to OTK. It's very, very fragile. It's very glass cannon. So yeah, definitely worthy of being Rogue, in my opinion. Goki. Now, Goki is definitely a top tier contender. Definitely not worthy of being Rogue, but it's definitely one of the top tier decks. It's definitely not tier 1, but it's definitely a deck that can play Necro Valley and play some control factors. It has some it has some recurability when it comes to recoverability and losing your Goki cards. It can survive well under Necro Valley, so you definitely will see it on the ladder quite frequently. But it's a definitely deck that you would fight against quite frequently. So in my opinion, I think it's worthy of being probably tier... It's definitely not a tier 3 deck. Well, it depends. In my opinion, it's worthy of being tier 2 to tier 3. It's kind of like a tier 2.5, let's just say it. So I guess you could say this is probably the highest one out of all of them. Goki and Aramage are probably the top two, in my opinion, that are definitely hard to beat. Well, the top tier 3 decks, but it's definitely a deck that you will see quite often if you play with Balance or the Trap skill with Odium. You definitely see that with Goki. Gravekeepers. Now, Gravekeepers is a deck that you will come across on the ladder quite frequently, but is a top tier material? No, not really. I mean, if you verse Gravekeepers, if you know they're setting one and they have the Necrovalent field, you know you're versing Gravekeepers. You know you're going to run to a Spy. So, is it easy to out? Probably not really for the top tier decks, like top tier 1 or tier 2. But it's definitely worthy of being a tier 3 deck, because they do run, I think they run Balance and they also run, I think, Sealed Tombs and stuff like that. They used to, but I'm not too sure if they run now. But Gravekeeper is definitely worthy of being tier 3. It's definitely not on the top of the tier 3 slots, but it is definitely a tier 3 deck, in my opinion. Now, these two heroes, you have your Vision heroes and your Elemental heroes. So, since we got the release of Stratos from the Sharkfang box, Vision heroes are more accessible than usual. So, if you have the Vision heroes and you didn't have Stratos from the selection boxes, now you can actually make heroes more competitively. You can run it with Bring It, and you can also play it with other skills as well, but mostly with Bring It, just to get into your Destiny Hero Plasma. So, in my opinion, Vision Hero is definitely worthy of being a tier 2 deck. Rather than tier 3, it's definitely probably one of the top tier 2 decks. In my opinion, it's a very good deck to come across, but it's not really a deck that you would find on the ladder. Well, actually, no, cancel that. You would find it on the ladder quite frequently if you're versing an Asta Phoenix player. So yeah, definitely easy to spot, but also very easy to counter. It's not easy, well, not easy to counter depending on if you go first or second. If they go second, good luck on not getting your back row removed, because once the deck gets going, it's hard to stop because it can literally OTK you. Other hero rogue potential, like Elemental Hero Stratos in all the other decks, it's rogue. If you're finding hero decks on the ladder, I've come across Stratos decks with. Yeah, I've come across a lot of decks that run Stratos and no other like Vision Hero stuff, so definitely rogue. And Infernities, it's up there. It's on the ladder. Once it gets going, it's very hard to stop. But if you're playing against a duelist that isn't too familiar with Infernities, you hope they mess up. But if it gets going and it gets around the back row, gets around interruptions, yeah, the deck is literally beats you. Definitely a tier 2 contender in my opinion on the ladder. It's not top tier, but well, I mean, it's not too top tier, but it's definitely worthy of being a tier in general. Up there in general. Well, in my opinion, it could be tier 2, tier 3, depending. But definitely probably at the bottom of the tier 2 barrel, I guess. Yeah, probably at the bottom of the tier 2 barrel in my tier 2 list in my opinion. Now, Invoked. Invoked is one of the decks that you will come across quite frequently on the ladder. If you know they're gonna set a monster face down and set a lot of back row, you know you're gonna verse an Invoked deck. So definitely until we get the nerf, it's a tier 1 contender, because this deck works in. It's an engine-based deck. It works in all other decks. It's Invoked. The Invoked engine is really powerful. I'm not gonna lie. Even I found it to be very powerful, even on the ladder. And it's definitely not easy to beat if they get going. So if they and most decks run most Invoked decks run Concentrating Current. So well, some decks run Concentrating Current, and if it gets going with the Poker Trio, OTK with Concentrating Current, it's really hard to stop. Now, even though we have Karakuri on here, Karakuri is definitely a very powerful deck on the ladder. Definitely worthy of being tier 1. It has some really good, it's very, very consistent, and it's also very, very strong on the ladder. Probably one of the top tier, yeah, top 2. Well, probably one of the top 2 decks as of right now. Because Karakuri, it's so consistent that you will literally recover your resources and you will just plus off that. You can easily start with a 7-card starting hand field, whatever. So once you get your what is it called again? The level 2. Basically, it starts off your plays when it comes to searching. So you summon that, and then you get a plus. It's self-replacing, and then you just swarm out on the field and just you draw like 1 to 2 cards. It's crazy. And if you run like the run that spell that lets you draw 2, you go plus like you start with 9 cards. It's so bad. It's so broken. Until it gets hit, it's definitely probably the most top tier deck on the ladder if it gets going. Light One Engine. Now, Light One Engine is using like Thunder Dragons, as you can see here. I do have a Thunder Dragon one, but that's separate. Now, Light Swans is a powerful deck, powerful engine nonetheless. You can mix Light Swans in a lot of different decks, so definitely powerful in terms of its mill engine. But yeah, it was used in Witchcrafters, it was used in Thunder Dragons, it was used in like normal Chaos decks. So literally, Light Swans is literally Chaos in a way. It's a Chaos-based engine in general. Definitely worthy of being. It does have its ups and downs. You can brick with it, even if you brick with Soul Recharge and charge the Light Brigade. Believe me, you can mill your most important cards, and you have to live through that. So it has its ups and downs, but it's definitely one of the few engines that is worthy of. It's not as top tier as it was before, but it's definitely not tier 2 potential, but it's definitely a tier 3 contender, because it can compete with all the other decks. It can compete against the tier 3 engines. It can compete against the tier 1 engines. As for tier 2, not entirely sure. Actually, it depends. It all depends on its playability. Now let's talk about Lunar Lights. Lunar Lights is a very, very good free-to-play deck. If you are making your first competitive deck first time, Lunar Lights and Arrow Mages are probably the best deck to make or if you're just starting off from one box in general. So yeah, definitely, well, I don't have to say anything, it's Lunar Lights. It's worthy of being a very powerful deck, but Rogue, not really. Well, kind of, but it's definitely not well, if you have an untargetable boss monster, then yeah, it's definitely going to be very hard to deal with. It has good matchups against Dark Magician. It has a good matchup against Black Wings in a way, actually, now I think about it. Because you can't Kalut can't even target it, and you can't even destroy it with the Synchro. It does have a bit of a tricky situation against Cristrons. But Invoked, against Invoked, it's hit or miss, because, okay, well, if you're not versing an Invoked deck that doesn't run Concentrating Current, you're fine, but if you're versing one that runs Concentrating Current, yeah, kind of screwed, because the most I think the boss monster for Lunar Lights goes is the typical number is usually 4800 attack, but it can go higher the longer the duel. But if they make more than one, it's really hard for Invoke to deal with. But if they run non-targeting removal, then yeah, Lunar Lights is pretty much screwed. But making your boss monster first turn, pretty hard to deal with. But if they, non-targeting removal literally kills the deck. But other than that, not all decks run non-targeting removal. Well, not all decks. Not all decks run. Actually, most decks run targeting removal, but not all decks run non-targeting removal. That's what I was trying to say. So against the other decks, it's definitely worthy of being tier 1, tier 3, but it's kind of like tier 2.5. In my opinion, it's probably D3. Yeah. Now I think about it, you have your Goki, you have your Aramage, and Lunalights. These are the top 3. Well, actually, no. Lunalight and Aramage, sorry, not Goki. Goki is not free to play. Aramage and Lunalight are probably the best free to play decks on the ladder as of right now, as I'm going through the tier list. Now, Mermaid is definitely a deck that you should not underestimate. It does have its powerful moments, as you've seen in one of my previous videos, and it's also a sleeper deck. From the sleeper, well, it has sleeper. It got its water support from the Shark Fang box, but it also has powerful water-based stuff. If you run with Deep Sea Diva, and you have Concentrating Current in the deck just literally OTKs. No one suspects it because they would think like, oh, it's probably they're not gonna OTK me, and then once there you go in for the direct attack and you play Concentrating Current. Then it literally, you're gonna literally get screwed. As of right now, it's tier 3. Actually, no, it's Rogue. But keep your eye on Mermaid because it's definitely going to be. If it picks up popularity, it's definitely going to be probably tier 3, but if any of the top decks get hit in general, it'll move up a ladder probably to be either tier 2 or tier 3. Definitely not tier 1 because it does have its brick moments, but it definitely can go off like crazy if you underestimate it. So tier 3, but Rogue in general, in my personal pick, I would probably put as tier 3. But it's more likely it's a Rogue deck at the moment. But it's definitely a sleeper deck that you should keep your eye on. Now, we have the Neos engine. Neos engine, it's like, like the... actually, now I think about it, I should probably move this up to probably the top of the Rogue matchups, Rogue list, because it's definitely a sleeper contender. It's definitely one of the decks that should not fall... you should keep your eye on. For the Neos engine is pretty much the Neos engine. It's literally an engine. It's not like the Stratos. It's definitely good for free to play, but yet it's not really. It's definitely something you should keep your eye on if you're versing the favorite hero versions of the Neos engine. It's definitely, they run Necro Valley in that, so be careful of that if you are playing on the ladder. So yeah. That's all I'm going to say. It's definitely a Rogue matchup, but it's not easy to lose to. But if you're not careful, you will lose to it if they run Favorite Hero with Necro Valley. Yeah, definitely not something you would come across. Ritual Beast. Now, Ritual Beast, a very, very annoying deck on the ladder. What do I think of this? It's a very good stall, yet it's a stall and also... it's a stall yet mini aggro type of engine. It does have its moments. If you can stop it at that precise point where it's weak to, or in this case anything that prevents it from swarming, then yes, Ritual Beast literally lose. It's definitely one of the top tier decks. Definitely tier 1, tier 2 worthy. Definitely not tier 3. It's one of the top 2. Top 2 tier factors. I'd probably rank it possibly tier 1. As of right now, Ritual Beasts, they can swarm the field. They can do a lot. If you're not careful, the deck can literally outpace or literally out-tempo you in general. Because if they run, they use Dolphin and they use Ways to Search, and if you're versing a skilled Ritual Beast player, you aren't going to do well. Let's just say that. Shiranui, no need to say anything. It's definitely tier 1 worthy, because it's you're versing either tier. You're versing you will find this deck on the ladder quite frequently. If you are playing on the ladder, because I've versed a lot of Shiranui decks, even when it's not on the PvP ladder, you will find it on event-based PvP, and also you will find it in other places as well. Even casual, I'm not kidding, you will find it in casual. It's a very popular engine, but it's definitely needs to get hit, because the deck is literally the deck can literally OTK you if you're not careful, and I've been not careful a couple of times, and it's definitely something to work around. So be very careful. 6 Samurais, possibly tier 3. Why do I think it's tier 3? Well, you are going to find 6 Samurais quite frequently. It does have some spell trap negations. It does work well against Dark Magician. It can work against heroes, but they have multiple spell and traps on the in their back row. And if you get lucky with a tier, if you get lucky using your dual wield against returning their back row, and if you go first, you can sort of get a lucky win, but it's very predictable if they summon a 6 Samurai monster on the field with no, well, if they summon no Shien, they just leave a monster in attack mode, for example Fuma, and they have multiple back rows, multiple back row in the back row, you know one of them is going to be a dual wield, so it's very predictable to fight around, to play around. So yeah, it's definitely tier 3. It's not worthy of being tier 2, tier 1. They did get XYZ support, but is it going to be top tier? Not really. It's tier 3 at most. Super Heavy Samurai, tier 2? No, tier 3. Now that I'm up to this point, it's definitely a good. It's a very good free-to-play deck, because all the cards I think are low rarity, and you only need like one of the ultra rare Super Heavy Samurai cards. So yeah, definitely Super Heavy Samurai, Lunar Lights, and Iron Mages are definitely worthy of being free-to-play, top tier. Now, Thunder Dragons. Thunder Dragons is good as a rogue deck, but it's also kind of up there because it has some recurability, because once they get removed, they self-replace themselves. So yeah, it's very good. If they get banished from the field, yeah, it can self-replace if you're running Thunder Dragon Raw, yeah. And if you're running some other engines as well, Thunder Dragons they're hard to get around if you have swarm ability. You need at least 3 cards, or 3 attacks, or yeah, probably around 3 cards to 3 attacks to just get around Thunder Dragons. Or if you have something that can prevent it from activating their effects when you either destroy them or destroy them by battle without preventing them from activating their effects. Yeah, definitely worthy. It's definitely, and they're also, most of the stuff is free to play as well, so definitely worthy of being tier 2 if you're mixing with the Lightsworn engine, because it can swarm and it can recur. It is definitely worthy of being top tier. Even if you're running with Chaos Dragon Levineer, if you're running with Chaos Levineer, the deck is less. It goes to tier, definitely it's tier 2. Most likely, but if you're not running with Levineer, you still have your other Chaos engine, and you have your still Chaos. You have your other Chaos pieces, and the deck is just powerful enough. You don't even need Chaos Dragon Levineer. But if you have Chaos Dragon Levineer, it's just icing on top. So yeah, it's definitely worthy of being tier 2. Try mids. Besides the Sphinx, it's pretty easy to counter during their turn. Well, if you can counter it during their turn, but if you bait out their back row, and you bait out their field spell swaps, the deck is pretty easy to beat. Definitely not tier 2, only tier 1 worthy, because you run it with balance, but it's it's definitely in there for the tier 3 slot. Definitely not tier 2 because it for the current meta it's not that good in right now. But if we go into a slower format, yeah, this deck can definitely move to tier 2 or tier 1 depending on how slow we get. If we're going to a really slow format, Shiranui is actually, now I think about it, it's more of a tier 2. Yeah, at most it's probably tier 2. Vendrick, you are going to find this on the ladder quite frequently. It's definitely annoying to come up against, but it's not the end of the world. It's definitely worthy of being a rogue contender. Yeah. Now, finally, Weather Painters. Wow, I've been talking for over 40 minutes. Weather Painters is the last one on the list that I like to talk about. Weather Painters is definitely a deck that you will come up against quite frequently on the ladder. Not all the time, but it's definitely on there, being worthy as a free-to-play deck, but it's also a somewhat of a non-free-to-play deck. It depends on what techs you run in your deck. So you can probably get away with probably 1 to 2 snow, but the rest you can literally... It's literally very free. It's very, it can be budget friendly, but if you have free snow, you can just max out on it. The only reason why you run free snow is to max out on your chance of drawing this to set up your plays. But if you're running like the Valhalla spell card that you can special summon, and then you just use your Thundery Canvas monster to replace it, it's literally easy going. It's very budget, so definitely worthy of being a top contender. It does fall under, let's say, probably not doesn't beat DDDs, not DDs, doesn't beat Blue Eyes, but it does because Blue Eyes can out-control, well, Blue Eyes can literally out-control this deck very easily. Well, it depends, actually. If you can out-resource Blue Eyes, then yeah, it's literally... Actually, now that I think about it, yeah, probably can out-source Blue Eyes. But it depends on how you open. Yeah, that's my tier list. So let's... let's recap on the whole entire list. So we've got... Karakuris. Now, Karakuris, tier 1, definitely. So we have Karakuris, Black Wings, we have Crystrons, we have Invoked Engine in general, we have the Ritual Beast, and your Shiranuis. That is your tier 1, in my opinion, of what you can find the most on the ladder, and what you will literally suffer against on the ladder. Tier 2, you will find Cyber Dragons, you will find Dark Magician, you will find Dragunities, your Heroes, your Infernis, and your... Thunder Dragons. Not as much. It's definitely not on the top tier of the tier 2s, but you will find the Thunder Dragon engine quite frequently if you are lucky to have to verse a lot of them. For Gokis, Goki's probably one of the... it's probably the top tier... it's probably one of the top tier... tier 3 deck if you're finding on the ladder, because it has recurability, it has recovery, and it has control. It has everything you need to literally control the game, depending on... Because if you're finding a Goki mirror match, believe me, whoever literally strikes first literally loses. It all depends on how much resources you have to out-resource your opponent. So literally what Goki does is it's a resource playing game. So if you can out-resource your opponent, you win with Goki. Aramage, Lunalight, and Super Heavy Samurai, these 3, and probably Weather Painters, depending on if you're lucky enough to pull enough snows, is definitely a free-to-play. These 4 probably good free-to-play decks if you're making on the ladder. But definitely you're going to find Aramage quite frequently on the ladder than most other decks. You'll find Aramage because it's very free-to-play friendly, and everyone can literally play it. Even I play it sometimes, once in a while, but not all the time. But it's a very annoying annoying deck to deal with. Lunalights, you will find that on the ladder quite frequently, either with balanced builds or actually not balanced builds. You will find it with either Destiny Draw builds or some decks that use Ties of Binds or anything that or Master Fusion or anything that literally helps it to get its combo pieces. Well, not combo. Well, yeah, combo pieces ready. So you will find Lunar Lights on the ladder quite frequently. Super Heavy Samurai, you will find that on the ladder. Not probably as most as these other two for the free to play decks on the ladder. Weather Painters, you won't find them as much, but this is the part where you do find these on the ladder, but not as frequently. Weather Painters, you will find it on the ladder, but it's not on there quite often, but you will find it. Blue Eyes, it's definitely up there in the top tier 3 section, and you will find it quite frequently on the ladder. DDDs, they're a good roguish tier 3 deck that you will find on the ladder, but it's definitely not a deck that you should underestimate. It can brick quite frequently. I played it and I've bricked quite often. If you don't open up your combo pieces, it's literally hard to deal with. Evil Eye, you will find Evil Eye quite frequently on the ladder as well. Unlike, well, Evil Eye, Blue Eyes, yeah, Evil Eye and Blue Eyes you will find on the ladder quite frequently. DD's not as much. Now I think about it, I probably should move it around. Yeah, DD's not as much, but yeah, Evil Eye you will find it quite frequently on the ladder. More Evil Eye more than DD's. Gravekeepers not as much, but you will find it once in the blue moon, but it's definitely on there on the ladder that you will find it if you get lucky. Lights One Engine, most decks nowadays, well, if you can, it doesn't appear as much, but it's mostly appear in chaos-based decks like Thunder Dragons or any niche chaos-based decks if they need to mill. So yeah, you will find that. Six Samurais, you won't find as much as Lightsworn. Actually, depends on how lucky you get. But yeah, Six Samurais, not really as much. Actually, now I think about it, you find Tribesmen more than Six Samurais, but you will find Six Samurais more often than you'll find Tribesmen more than Six Samurais. But Tribesmen, yeah, definitely on there. Six Samurais, not as much. You can verse it, just not often. Now, here's where the rogue comes in. Mermaid. Don't underestimate this deck. This deck is definitely worthy of being tier 3 or tier 2 if the format changes and gets a little bit slower. Because Mermaid can OTK literally pretty quick if they open up pretty well, because they can just play the extenders, and if the extenders go off, they can literally OTK you. And it's not a simple deck to fight against if they go second. Amazonas, you'll find that quite frequently if you're running against Odeon based decks. Ancient Gears, if you're versing Crowler, you will know it's Ancient Gears, literally. Desperado, if you find a person that's running Master whatever that thingy is, Satori skill, you will find that. Gladiator Beast, if you're running a balance-based deck and you know it's Gladiator Beast, it's Gladiator Beast. Dododo, Go-Go-Go, whatever, this deck is Rogue. It's literally Rogue. Hero Engine in general, you will find both of these, Neos and the Element Hero package in like Rogue. It's like not even top tier. You will find it, but since we got Stratos, that you will find it quite frequently on the ladder. But not often, but you will find it in terms of its recurrence on the PvP ladder. Vendrick, you will find this on the ladder quite frequently, not all the time in terms of the tier 1, tier 2 happening, but you will find it on the ladder quite often if you verse an Alexis based Alexis, or I think Pegasus, yeah, Master Rights based deck. Master Rights 2, I think. If you're versing a Master Rights 2 based deck, you know you're going to verse Vendrick. So yeah, that's literally it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed my tier list discussion for what you might find on the November/December, well, depending on what gets hit on the ban list. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.